I'm not going to be executed because this is all built on a lie. I'm smiling because I believe the truth is eventually going to come out. Those words came from a man who, despite spending nearly 3 decades on death row, continues to insist that he is innocent. On May 21st, 2026, at exactly 10 a.m., the state of Tennessee is scheduled to execute Tony Von Caruthers at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Before that moment arrives, he will be offered a final meal. He will be given an opportunity to speak his last words. And unless a court grants relief or the governor intervenes, the sentence imposed nearly 30 years ago will finally be carried out. Tony Caruthers was convicted in 1996 for the murders of 3 people in Memphis, Tennessee. Since then, he has remained on death row, fighting a conviction that has become one of the state's most controversial capital cases. The reason this case continues to attract attention is simple. Almost nothing about it is straightforward. Supporters of the conviction argue that the legal process worked exactly as it was intended. They point to a jury that heard the evidence, weighed the testimony, and unanimously found Caruthers guilty. 3 people lost their lives in a horrific crime, and they believe justice has already been delayed for far too long. Critics of the conviction see something different. They argue that important evidence was never fully examined, that critical information was withheld from the defense, and that questions surrounding the case remain unanswered even after decades of appeals. Now, with the execution date approaching, those arguments have become more urgent than ever. This is the story of the crime, the investigation, the conviction, and the legal battle that continues to this day. To understand how it all began, we need to go back to Memphis in early 1994. February 1994. 3 people suddenly vanish. 21-year-old Marcelous Anderson, known by friends as Cello, disappears without explanation. His mother, 43-year-old Delois Anderson, also vanishes. So does Frederick Tucker, a 17-year-old friend of Marcelous. Family members report them missing, hoping they will return home. Days pass, then an entire week. No phone calls, no sightings, no clues. The search continues, but there is no sign of any of the 3 missing individuals. Then, on March 3rd, investigators receive information that leads them to Rose Hill Cemetery on Elvis Presley Boulevard in Memphis. What they discover there is shocking. Detectives focus their attention on an existing gravesite. Beneath several inches of dirt and hidden under a sheet of plywood, they uncover a horrifying scene. Buried beneath another casket are the bodies of all 3 missing victims. Investigators immediately notice disturbing similarities. The hands of each victim are tied behind their backs. Frederick Tucker's feet are also bound. Marks around his neck suggest some form of restraint had been used. A red sock is found wrapped around the neck of Delois Anderson. The scene is unlike anything many of the investigators have encountered before. The bodies are transported for autopsy. The examinations are conducted by medical examiner Dr. O.C. Smith. His findings are grim. Marcelous Anderson suffered 3 gunshot wounds. 1 bullet entered his forehead. 2 others struck his neck. According to Dr. Smith, one of those wounds severed the spinal cord, leaving Anderson unable to move but not immediately killing him. Frederick Tucker had also been shot. Smith concluded that the pressure exerted by the burial process contributed to his death. Delois Anderson's cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. According to the medical examiner, her position inside the grave and the presence of dirt in her airway prevented her from breathing. But the most controversial conclusion came at the end of Smith's testimony. He stated that all 3 victims were still alive when they were buried. It was a finding that would later become one of the most disputed pieces of evidence in the entire case. At the time, however, it dramatically shaped the investigation. The idea that 3 people had been buried alive added an entirely new level of horror to an already brutal crime. Investigators also recover other pieces of evidence. Inside the grave is a blanket-like cloth soaked with blood. At a residence believed to be connected to the crime, detectives collect fingerprints from several surfaces. As evidence begins to accumulate, authorities start building a theory about what happened. According to investigators, Marcelous Anderson was involved in the local drug trade in North Memphis. Prosecutors would later argue that control of that territory became the motive for murder. Their theory centered on a man named Tony Von Caruthers. Authorities believed Caruthers wanted to eliminate competition and expand his influence in the area. The investigation soon focused on events that occurred on February 24, 1994, the same day the victims were last seen alive. Witnesses reported seeing Marcelous Anderson and Frederick Tucker riding in a Jeep Cherokee alongside 2 brothers, James Montgomery and Jonathan Montgomery. Later that evening, the group arrived at the home of Nikita Shaw, who was related to the Montgomery brothers. According to Shaw, several people entered the basement of the residence. Not long afterward, James Montgomery returned upstairs. What happened next stayed with Shaw for years. She later told investigators that Montgomery instructed her to leave the house because he needed to handle some business. The request immediately made her uneasy. Believing that something was wrong, she left the residence. Prosecutors would later argue that what happened inside that basement marked the beginning of a deadly kidnapping plot. According to the state's theory, Tony Caruthers and James Montgomery planned the abduction of Marcelous Anderson. Their goal, prosecutors alleged, was robbery and the elimination of a rival in the drug trade, Delois Anderson and Frederick Tucker, according to the prosecution, became additional victims simply because they were present. The state alleged that all 3 individuals were restrained, transported from the house, and ultimately taken to Rose Hill Cemetery. There, prosecutors said, they were buried in a concealed grave beneath an existing burial site. The case remained unsolved for only a short time. A week after the victims disappeared, investigators received crucial information from Jonathan Montgomery. According to authorities, he directed police to the exact location where the bodies had been hidden. But before Jonathan Montgomery could face trial himself, another shocking event occurred. He was found dead inside his jail cell. Officials ruled that he had hanged himself. His death left only 2 men facing prosecution for the murders, James Montgomery and Tony Von Caruthers. Both men were charged with 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. The charges carried the most severe punishment available under Tennessee law. If convicted, both men could face execution. And as prosecutors prepared their case, they would argue that the evidence pointed directly to Tony Caruthers as one of the men responsible for one of the most disturbing triple murders in Tennessee history. As the case moved toward trial, prosecutors worked to build a narrative that connected Tony Caruthers to every stage of the crime. Their case relied on several key elements. There was testimony from witnesses who linked Caruthers to both the Montgomery brothers and the alleged dispute over drug territory in North Memphis. There was also the testimony of Albert Shaw, a witness who claimed Caruthers had been involved in planning the murders. Combined with the prosecution's theory regarding motive, Investigators believed they had enough evidence to secure a conviction. Caruthers, however, denied any involvement. From the beginning, he maintained that he had nothing to do with the kidnappings or the murders. His defense argued that he was not present when the crimes occurred and that the state's case depended heavily on unreliable testimony and circumstantial evidence. But before a jury ever heard opening statements, another issue emerged, one that would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. The trial was scheduled to begin in 1996. By that point, Caruthers had already gone through multiple court-appointed attorneys. Over time, conflicts developed between Caruthers and the lawyers assigned to represent him. Some attorneys were dismissed. Others withdrew from the case after disagreements with their client. Eventually, Caruthers requested yet another attorney. The court refused. The judge ruled that enough lawyers had already been appointed and that the case could not be delayed indefinitely. As a result, Caruthers was left with a decision: proceed with existing counsel or represent himself. He chose to represent himself. The decision would shape everything that followed. Years later, post-conviction attorneys argued that the choice was not truly voluntary. They pointed to Caruthers' documented history of mental illness and claimed that his distrust of attorneys was influenced by psychological issues rather than a rational legal strategy. The state disagreed. Prosecutors maintained that the court followed proper procedures and that Caruthers knowingly chose self-representation after repeatedly rejecting appointed counsel. Whatever the reason, the result was extraordinary. A man facing the possibility of execution entered a capital murder trial acting as his own attorney. Without formal legal training, Caruthers found himself responsible for tasks normally handled by experienced defense lawyers. He questioned witnesses. He challenged evidence. He delivered arguments before the jury. And he attempted to defend himself against charges that could cost him his life. The odds were overwhelming. Capital murder trials are among the most complicated proceedings in the American legal system. They involve extensive rules of evidence, expert testimony, and legal procedures that often take years for attorneys to master. Yet Caruthers stood alone. As the trial unfolded, prosecutors presented their version of events. They argued that Caruthers and James Montgomery had orchestrated the kidnapping of Marcelous Anderson as part of a plan motivated by money, control, and rivalry. According to the state, Anderson was targeted because of his involvement in the drug trade. Frederick Tucker and Delois Anderson became victims because they were caught up in the scheme. The prosecution called witness after witness. Jurors listened as investigators described the crime scene. They heard testimony about the discovery of the bodies, and they were presented with evidence intended to show that Caruthers had participated in the murders. Then came one of the most powerful moments of the trial. Medical examiner Dr. O.C. Smith took the stand. He explained the injuries suffered by each victim. He described the gunshot wounds, the bindings, the condition of the bodies when they were recovered, and then he delivered the conclusion that would leave a lasting impression on the jury. In his professional opinion, all three victims had been alive when they were buried. The testimony was devastating. The idea that the victims had remained conscious, trapped beneath the earth as dirt filled the grave around them, added an emotional weight that was impossible to ignore. Years later, critics of the conviction would point to this moment as one of the most significant in the entire trial, because despite its importance, the testimony went largely unchallenged. Caruthers did not present an independent forensic expert. He did not offer competing medical testimony, and he did not aggressively cross-examine Dr. Smith regarding the buried alive conclusion. Whether that happened because of limited legal knowledge, lack of resources, mental health struggles, or strategic decisions remains a matter of debate. What is clear is that the jury heard only one side of the medical evidence. The prosecution rested. The defense attempted to challenge the state's case. But without experienced counsel and without expert witnesses capable of countering the prosecution's forensic testimony, Caruthers faced an uphill battle. After hearing all of the evidence, jurors began deliberations. The decision would determine whether Tony Von Caruthers would spend the rest of his life in prison or face death. On April 26, 1996, the verdict was announced. The jury found Tony Von Caruthers guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The case then moved into the penalty phase. Now, jurors had another decision to make. Should Caruthers receive life imprisonment, or should he be sentenced to death? Prosecutors argued that the nature of the crime justified the harshest punishment available. During closing arguments, prosecutor Bobby Carter emphasized the brutality of the murders. At one point, he told jurors that if these crimes did not qualify for the death penalty, then no case ever would. The jury ultimately agreed. After considering the evidence and aggravating circumstances, they returned a sentence of death. Not once, but 3 separate times. 1 death sentence for each victim: Marcelous Anderson, Delois Anderson, and Frederick Tucker. For the families of the victims, the verdict brought a measure of closure. For Tony Caruthers, it marked the beginning of a journey that would keep him on death row for decades. Yet the story was far from over. In fact, many of the most controversial developments had not happened yet. Because in the years that followed, appeals courts would begin examining how the trial had been conducted. Questions would emerge about evidence. Questions would emerge about witnesses. And eventually, even some of the central conclusions presented to the jury would come under scrutiny. What seemed settled in 1996 would become the subject of fierce legal battles for the next 30 years. Following the convictions, the legal battle entered a new phase. For most death penalty cases, appeals are expected. But in Tony Caruthers' case, the years that followed would raise new questions and add fresh layers of controversy to an already complex story. One of the first major developments came in 2000. An appeals court reviewed the circumstances of the trial and concluded that Tony Caruthers and James Montgomery should not have been tried together. According to the court, the joint trial created legal problems significant enough to warrant a different outcome for Montgomery. As a result, James Montgomery was granted a new trial. Rather than face another capital murder proceeding, Montgomery eventually accepted a plea agreement. Under that deal, he received a sentence of 27 years in prison. Years later, in 2015, he was released. Tony Caruthers, however, remained on death row. The ruling that benefited Montgomery did not overturn Caruthers' conviction, and his death sentences stayed in place. For the state, the case remained resolved. For Caruthers and his supporters, the fight was only beginning. Then, more than a decade later, another unexpected development emerged. In 2010, James Montgomery gave a statement to an investigator regarding the murders. According to that statement, Tony Caruthers had not participated in the kidnappings or killings. Montgomery claimed that he had organized the crimes himself. He further alleged that another individual, Ronnie Eyeball Irving, had played a role in carrying out the abductions. The statement quickly became a centerpiece of Caruthers' post-conviction efforts. His attorneys argued that the account supported their long-standing claim that the wrong man had been convicted. The state viewed the statement very differently. Prosecutors pointed out that Montgomery was a convicted murderer who had already secured a plea deal and served much of his sentence. They argued that statements made years after the crime were inherently unreliable and did not outweigh the evidence presented to the jury. Courts ultimately agreed with the state's position. Although the statement became part of the legal record, it was not considered sufficient to overturn Caruthers' conviction. But the controversy did not end there. As attorneys continued reviewing the evidence, attention turned towards several unresolved forensic questions. One of those questions involved fingerprints. During the original investigation, detectives recovered fingerprints from the residence believed to be connected to the kidnappings. Those prints were examined and compared against known suspects. According to defense attorneys, none of the fingerprints matched Tony Caruthers. They also did not match James Montgomery. In fact, they did not match any individual who was ultimately prosecuted for the crime. To the defense, that fact raised serious concerns. They argued that unidentified fingerprints at a critical location suggested the possibility that other individuals had been involved. The state responded that the absence of a fingerprint match did not prove innocence. Investigators noted that multiple people had access to the residence over time, and that fingerprints alone could not determine who participated in the murders. The disagreement would continue for years. Then there was the issue of DNA evidence. Inside the grave, investigators recovered a blood-stained piece of fabric. Testing later revealed the presence of DNA from an unidentified male. That discovery immediately became another point of contention. Defense attorneys argued that modern DNA testing could help determine whether another suspect had been involved. Particular attention focused on Ronnie Irving, the man identified by James Montgomery years later. Although Irving had been killed in 2002, his DNA profile and fingerprint records reportedly remained available. The defense repeatedly sought permission to compare the unidentified DNA against Irving's profile. They argued that the results could provide valuable information regarding who was actually involved in the crime. The state opposed those efforts. Prosecutors argued that even if the DNA belonged to someone else, it would not necessarily eliminate Tony Caruthers as a participant. Their position was that additional DNA evidence could potentially identify another individual without disproving the state's theory regarding Caruthers. Eventually, courts agreed with that reasoning. Requests for further testing were denied. The ruling stated that the proposed DNA analysis would not be capable, by itself, of conclusively proving Caruthers' innocence. But perhaps the most debated issue involved the testimony that had played such a powerful role during the original trial. The claim that the victims had been buried alive. Back in 1996, jurors heard Dr. O.C. Smith testify that all three victims were still alive when they were placed into the grave. The testimony was dramatic, it was emotional, and it likely influenced how jurors viewed the severity of the crime. For years, that conclusion remained largely unquestioned. Then new opinions began to emerge. In 2005, forensic pathologist Dr. Cleveland Blake reviewed the evidence and reached a different conclusion. According to Blake, the available medical evidence suggested that the victims may have already been dead before they were buried. The opinion directly challenged one of the prosecution's most important claims. Even more significantly, Dr. O.C. Smith later appeared to soften or retreat from aspects of his original conclusion. That development gave Caruthers' supporters new ammunition. They argued that jurors had never heard the full scientific debate. Some believed that the death sentences might have been different had alternative medical opinions been presented during the trial. In fact, years later, two former jurors reportedly stated that the revised medical evidence would have affected how they viewed the case. According to their statements, they might not have supported imposing the death penalty had they known that experts disagreed about whether the victims were alive when buried. For critics of the conviction, that revelation was significant. For prosecutors, however, it did not change the outcome. The state maintained that regardless of how the victims ultimately died, the evidence still supported the murder convictions and the sentences imposed. Then another controversy surfaced, one involving a witness whose testimony had helped support the prosecution's case. Albert Shaw had testified during the original proceedings and provided information that linked Caruthers to the murders. For years, his role in the case appeared straightforward. But in August 2024, nearly 3 decades after the trial, new information was disclosed. Documents revealed that Shaw had worked as a paid confidential informant. According to Caruthers' attorneys, that information had never been disclosed to the defense during the original trial. The revelation immediately sparked criticism. Defense lawyers argued that jurors should have known about any financial relationship between Shaw and law enforcement. They contended that such information could have affected how the witness's credibility was evaluated. The state maintained that the conviction remained valid and continued to defend the outcome of the case. Whether the late disclosure constituted a constitutional violation became the subject of ongoing legal arguments. By this point, decades had passed since the murders. Yet instead of fading away, the controversy surrounding the case seemed to grow. Questions about fingerprints, questions about DNA, questions about forensic testimony, questions about witness credibility. Each side viewed the evidence through a completely different lens. Supporters of the conviction argued that none of the issues changed the fundamental facts presented at trial. Critics argued that taken together, the unresolved questions painted a troubling picture. And as the execution date drew closer, another legal battle was beginning to take center stage. This time, it would focus not on what happened in 1994, but on Tony Caruthers' mental condition in the present day. As the years passed, the debate surrounding Tony Caruthers' conviction expanded beyond questions of evidence and trial procedure. A new issue moved to the center of the case: his mental health. By 2026, Caruthers' attorneys were no longer arguing only about what happened in Memphis in 1994. They were also arguing that, regardless of the conviction itself, he could not legally be executed under the United States Constitution. In February 2026, his legal team filed motions asserting that Caruthers suffered from severe mental illness that prevented him from rationally understanding the reason for his execution. According to court filings, he had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. His attorneys described a man consumed by deeply rooted delusions. They said he believed judges, prosecutors, and even members of his own defense team were participants in a vast conspiracy against him. According to those filings, Caruthers insisted that the execution date itself was not real. He reportedly viewed it as a tactic designed to pressure him into abandoning legal claims rather than an actual plan by the state to carry out his sentence. His attorneys pointed to behavior they considered evidence of his deteriorating mental condition. Among the examples cited was his reported pattern of repeatedly contacting legal offices, sometimes hundreds of times within a single day. The legal question before the courts was not whether Caruthers suffered from mental illness. That point was largely undisputed. The question was whether his illness reached a constitutional threshold that would make his execution unlawful. The issue traces back to two major decisions of the United States Supreme Court. The first was Ford versus Wainwright in 1986. The second was Panetti versus Quarterman in 2007. Together, Those rulings established that the Eighth Amendment prohibits the execution of prisoners who cannot rationally understand the connection between their crimes and the punishment they are about to receive. Caruthers' attorneys argued that he met that standard. The state disagreed. Prosecutors argued that although Caruthers suffered from mental illness, he still understood that he had been convicted of murder and that the state intended to execute him as punishment for those crimes. After reviewing testimony and evidence, a Memphis judge issued a ruling in March 2026. The court concluded that Caruthers was legally competent to be executed. The decision represented a major setback for the defense, but it did not end the legal fight. Appeals quickly followed. As the scheduled execution date approached, multiple cases were moving through both state and federal courts. At the same time, another battle was unfolding over DNA evidence. On April 9, 2026, attorneys working with the ACLU filed an emergency request asking the Tennessee Supreme Court to authorize additional testing of evidence collected during the original investigation. They argued that modern forensic analysis could provide important answers that were unavailable during the 1990s. The court rejected the request. According to the ruling, even favorable results would not necessarily exclude Caruthers from participating in the crime, and therefore would not justify halting the execution. The defense responded by taking the issue into federal court. The effort to stop the execution continued on multiple fronts. Then came a direct appeal to the governor. On April 20th, 2026, a formal clemency petition was submitted to Tennessee Governor Bill Lee. The petition urged him to intervene before the execution could take place. Supporters argued that the unresolved questions surrounding the case warranted mercy or, at minimum, additional review. The pressure campaign soon expanded. A public petition reportedly gathered tens of thousands of signatures. Former death row prisoners who had later been exonerated also entered the debate. Among them were individuals who had once faced execution themselves before evidence established their innocence. They publicly urged state officials to reconsider the case and prevent what they feared could be a wrongful execution. Human rights organizations joined the effort as well. Advocates argued that the combination of disputed evidence, mental illness claims, and unanswered forensic questions justified a pause in the proceedings. Yet despite the growing attention, state officials remained consistent in their position. Prosecutors continued to argue that the conviction had survived decades of scrutiny. The case had been reviewed repeatedly. Appeals had been heard. Courts had examined the claims. And at every stage, the conviction remained intact. Governor Bill Lee had never granted clemency in a death penalty case during his tenure. As the final days approached, there was no indication that his position would change. Which brings us back to May 21st, 2026. If no court intervenes, if every remaining appeal is denied, and if clemency is not granted, Tony Vaughn Caruthers will be escorted into the execution chamber at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. He will receive a final meal. He will be allowed a final statement. And the state of Tennessee will carry out the sentence imposed nearly 30 years earlier. The planned method of execution is lethal injection. Although Tennessee law allows certain inmates to choose execution by electric chair under specific circumstances. Should the execution proceed, Caruthers would become one of a relatively small number of prisoners executed in Tennessee during the modern era of capital punishment. But statistics are only part of the story, because this case raises questions that extend far beyond a single defendant. On one side are 3 victims whose lives ended in a horrifying act of violence: Marcelous Anderson, Delois Anderson, Frederick Tucker. Their deaths were real. Their families suffered unimaginable loss. and a jury concluded that Tony Caruthers was responsible. For many people, that is where the story ends. The courts have spoken. The verdict has stood for decades. Justice, they argue, requires the sentence to be carried out. Others see the case differently. They point to disputed forensic conclusions. They point to untested evidence. They point to witness issues, questions about legal representation, and claims of severe mental illness. In their view, those concerns create uncertainty in a situation where uncertainty carries extraordinary consequences. Because unlike any other punishment, an execution cannot be reversed. A prison sentence can be overturned. Compensation can be awarded. A conviction can be vacated. But once an execution has been carried out, there is no second hearing, no new trial, no opportunity to correct a mistake. That reality is what makes cases like this so difficult. Not because everyone agrees on the facts, but because people looking at the same record can reach very different conclusions. As of now, the courts continue to weigh emergency motions. The clemency request remains before the governor, and the final outcome remains uncertain. What is certain is this. A jury convicted Tony Von Caruthers of 3 murders in 1996. He has spent nearly 3 decades on death row. The conviction has been challenged repeatedly and has survived extensive review. Yet questions raised by his supporters continue to generate debate. Whether those questions are enough to stop the execution is something only the courts and state officials can decide. And that leaves one final question. In a justice system that seeks certainty before imposing its ultimate punishment, how much certainty is enough when the punishment itself is irreversible?